Cocaine Cowboys, the deadly rise of Ireland's drug lords. The live show is on sale now. We're on the road on February 10th at the Lime Tree Theatre in Limerick, February 15th in Cork's Everyman Theatre, and on Sunday 18th, we're back at Dublin's 3 Olympia. April takes us to Galway's Town Hall Theatre, Killarney's INEC, and Belfast's Waterfront Studios. Check mcd.ie or venue for ticket sales. Eamon, a Cork drug dealer has had a really bad run of luck and everything kind of came on top of him at the one time.
Yeah, I think John Keith O'Donovan had a bad week last week, all right?
Yeah.
On Wednesday, he lost his house to the Criminal Assets Bureau, and on Friday, he got another year in jail.
Right.
Adding to his, I think, 51 criminal convictions that he's had over the years. I suppose he's one of these guys that we always get interested in all of a sudden. He's probably very well known in where he's from, you know, originally Grona in kind of North Cork City. Like when the cab case came up earlier this year, originally in May, and not a lot was said about it. Plus, he had the circuit case ahead of him, so we were kind of restrained and about how much we could really write about his background at that stage. But he ended up pleading guilty to possession of a small amount of drugs and cash in his house. So he was charged with money laundering and with possession with intent to supply. And I suppose the circumstances of his arrest in May 2020 were of interest as well, in that there was a tip-off from the guards that he was on his way to Dublin to buy heroin from a contact there. And then on the way back, they were coming through Mallow. And there was a guarded checkpoint. Now, they were actually under surveillance, and I think there was the armed support unit were there, like with the uniform. And I think they needed some encouragement to stop it. He was shot and grazed with a bullet in the shoulder. So that was, I suppose, the start of his bad luck. And that case then wrapped up last Friday when he pleaded guilty.
And May 2020 was COVID days. I mean,
it wasn't May; it was March. And it was literally, it was literally 2 days before the full lockdown. But really? Restrictions had already started, right. So there had been guarded checkpoints about, I think, at that time, making sure people were kind of, the likes of the St. Patrick's Day parades had all been cancelled. The rugby internationals had been cancelled. All that sort of stuff, at the pubs had shut at that stage.
There wasn't so much traffic on the roads either, because people were sort of starting to have to work from home and all the rest of it. And I remember at that stage, there was quite a swathe of drug dealers were lifted while they were kind of moving their product and all the rest of it. And clearly he was one of the earliest ones of those.
Yeah, obviously when the tide goes out, all the rocks are bare.
Yeah, indeed.
Or maybe they were in a panic to get their supply in and quick, knowing that it was going to be difficult to move around.
And heroin, of course, was going to be the drug that, I mean, initially it was felt maybe cocaine would see a dip because it was this recreational drug and there was nothing open and people wouldn't be going out. I don't think that actually played out, but heroin, I think, is that 24/7 drug that people take it because they're addicted to it, and nothing's going to stop the trade of it.
Yeah. And now when the car was actually stopped, it was cocaine that was found despite the tip-off. And it was the passenger that was eventually charged with that. He wasn't charged with the cocaine. But when they searched his house, they found a kind of a mix. I think it was a mix of, cutting agent and Xanax, and as well as the cash, I think about €9,000 hidden in a sock. Now, they went through, like in the cab case and the affidavit, they go through his criminal convictions, and a lot of it is nuisance enough. But one of them was for manslaughter, where he stabbed, pretty much randomly a neighbour that, basically a drunken row, and his neighbour was stabbed in the groin and bled to death. And this is somebody they grew up with, people they knew, the family were friends, the whole lot. And he was initially, himself and another man were convicted of murder, and then on appeal that was quashed, and on a retrial then he pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and a jury, luckily enough for him, found him not guilty of murder at that time. So he got a 7-year sentence for that. And then after that, then he got not too long after he got out, he got another 7-year sentence then when he was caught with a gun. And I suppose one of the lines from the Criminal Assets Bureau affidavit would have been, I don't think these criminal convictions actually reflect the level of criminality that he's involved in. So like he was always a player. At that stage, when he was arrested in March 2020, he was described as being one of the main suppliers of heroin in Cork City at the time. So like he wasn't small time. Now, there was different issues made of whether, he was an addict himself, but he was very much a dealer. I mean, what was found in his house was very much, if you have mixing agents there, you're not just using it for yourself, you're moving the stuff on.
And he was described as that, so a heroin dealer in the Cork area. And of course, heroin came to Cork about 10 years after it's initially started causing huge problems in Dublin. But I mean, it is a very heavily used drug in the Cork area. And obviously because there's a very organised, orchestrated supply chain. And, while John Keith O'Donovan's, the cab case, and he's after getting a year in prison, he seems to be one of those, outside Dublin dealers who's made connections probably with the family, who are the big heroin suppliers and who were growing at that point, and becoming the number one target of the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. The family were prolific heroin suppliers and are so, but they were one of the gangs that kind of grew after the clampdown on the Kinahan organisation. And I think they started supplying a lot of the wholesalers outside Dublin who the Kinahans had once supplied.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, he was caught because and O'Donovan was caught because there was information that he was on his way to a contact in Lucan to collect his a batch of heroin. And that person then was described as somebody who was known to be involved in drugs. He's originally from Clondalkin and had been previously charged with a significant amount of heroin in his possession and a submachine gun as well. Now, the case was dropped. There was a nolle prosequi entered when that person was due to come before the courts. But his background suggests that, that person himself is closely linked to those Ballyfermot gangs, not such as, but, that's pretty much the family who are in control there. I mean, there would be other, I suppose, lesser dealers that, might be dealing or subcontracting to people like O'Donovan in Cork or wherever, whether it's Athlone or, the various towns around the country now that all have their own heroin scene, their own group of people that are using the whole time.
We don't hear a huge amount of, criminals like himself from the Cork area. There's been always a kind of a glut of information from there. I think in the Sunday World in particular, we found that there was always a lot of sort of IRA activity down in Cork, and there was a feeling that the drug dealers were mainly contained. But I think evidence on the streets down there in recent years shows that there is any amount of drugs available.
Yeah, and there was. We did another cab case not so long ago, and there was kind of a description of, people getting off a bus and walking around buying his, a serious drug dealer. I mean, there always has been. I suppose it's quite possibly that they've just been a bit cuter. They haven't got involved in shooting wars like, the counterparts in Limerick. Over the years, some people have come out of Cork that it's quite staggering how big they've gotten before we've gotten to hear about them. They were quite adept in making sure that they stayed under the radar and just got on with business. And we know, going way back, you've covered it in your recent cocaine book, that there was a whole slew of international drug dealers based in, from West Cork and Cork City who were shipping in direct from, South America. So, there was, that element was always there. And maybe that's why, we never got kind of the stupid, street feuding going on, because there was such a potentially heavy element in the background that we're just able to simply and quickly keep a lid on things.
And there was also that Cork Mafia, of course, who were very heavily connected with George the Penguin Mitchell. Alan Buckley, who was... What happened, I think, from what I know of Cork, you had a lot of these dealers who were probably dealing in the city, where there was a lot of clientele, but they were living kind of outside in some of the villages outside the city. You had Alan Buckley running an antique shop, and you had others who were down there, and they were linked directly in with Mitchell. In actual fact, when Gardaí raided Mitchell's ecstasy making factory. It was he and Alan Buckley that were suspected of running that. A lot of that original Cork mafia fled after the Criminal Assets Bureau set up, because they did very much target Cork. And of course, Barry Galvin was put in as the solicitor there, a Cork man who had spoken openly on the Late Late Show about the problem Cork had with a lot of criminals that were hiding out down there, that were kind of looking as if they were legitimate businessmen, but in the background were running massive big drug operations. And almost the focus of CAB onto that part of the country in the early days did see them flee to become major wholesalers in Europe. We kind of passed our problem on to other countries. But that Cork mafia certainly were the big players back then. And since then, we have sort of individuals popping up, but there's no clear gang. And as you say, they're not feuding.
Yeah, and even if you see with O'Donovan, the fact that he was travelling to Dublin to buy, supply, rather than it being delivered or someone else, that there wasn't somebody directly importing heroin into Cork, that it was coming via Dublin, suggests that maybe they're just not at the same level. And that, I suppose heroin is one of those kind of niche areas that some drug dealers will deal everything except heroin. They do feel, that's a step too far, as if somehow running a murderous cocaine gang is fair enough, but a heroin dealing is spreading misery.
Yeah, exactly.
And somehow it's seen as a I suppose it's down the pecking order in the criminal world that if you're dealing heroin, that there's something wrong with you, that you're making it obvious you're completely amoral. Whereas I suppose with the other drugs, you can argue it's recreational and people are making a choice whether they go out and enjoy themselves at the weekends or not. Whereas heroin, it's well documented by so many people who've written their own memoirs about their opiate addiction, and that, the high is gone very soon afterwards. But the physical addiction is what kind of makes the money in the long run for the dealer. So, it is
guaranteed money in, isn't it?
It's the least ethical, I suppose, version of being a drug dealer.
So what about O'Donovan, and where was this house that he had purchased, or that the CAB have now seized?
Yeah, Mona Taggart is the townland, and it's northeast of Cork City. Sorry, it's northwest of Cork City. And it is literally in the middle of nowhere. Now, he bought it for £20,000 in 1996. But again, they were suggesting that it was now worth about €200,000. So it was worth, the Criminal Assets Bureau is worth their while going after it. Looking at it, it's surrounded now by kind of, the fabulous country mansions that are been built by other people. And this, it's pretty much a kind of a small little cottage on a sliver of land. But, it's in a nice area. It is very rural.
And was he living in it? And was he also in a council house in the city?
No, he was. Well, look, these guys move around, and they're in different places. But he was very much the sole occupant of that house. This is where they found the drugs. So this is where, I'm sure his neighbours would have been pretty horrified to find that their rural idyll were sharing it with a city drug dealer. His family home was Spriggs Road, his mother's house, which was also originally part of the Criminal Assets Bureau, I suppose, legal action against them. But there was an agreement reached in that, and that was returned to the mother. That was considered both were legitimate means, as were a number of bank accounts that had been frozen, and some of that was returned as well. Now, there was, I think, in total about 9,000 in one account, and then there was the cash that was seized in his house. And that was all, now deemed the proceeds of crime. But in terms of his mother, her story was accepted by the judge. She had offered her own affidavits, showing that she had worked all her life and that she had saved, a modest amount of money, and that the assets that had been identified as CAB as potentially being the proceeds of crime were deemed not to be. And she was able to keep her property as a result of that. Well, she certainly was able to settle with CAB, and the house was returned to her.
And so the house was bought so long ago, and how did CAB unravel the finances then? Are they able to go back that far into bank accounts, into social welfare payments, into people's, tax returns?
Well, in this case, it was simple enough in that they just knew he'd been living there and he was the only one. And the mother in whose name this house was bought never left Spriggs Road. So she was never in the house that was in her name.
Right.
And then just to make it really easy for them, I think just last year, it was actually just last October, O'Donovan put the house up for sale, and he was the only person dealing with the estate agents, and he represented himself as being the sole and only person with an interest in this property. So, I mean, and look, I mean, it was pretty much admitted in the end that this house was his.
Shot himself in the foot, in other words.
Yes, after being accidentally shot in the shoulder, or shot, not accidentally, but being shot in the shoulder.
Having hidden out there for a long time and having, hidden, he has his convictions and all the rest of it, but he managed to hang on to that asset for a long time.
Well, I mean, it did help, I suppose, being in jail for 14 years. You're not going to get into too much trouble, like in terms of your house. I mean, he bought it in 96. I mean, he was in prison, from about 2000 and whatever it was, 2002 or 2001 for at least 5 years. And then again from 2010 till, probably about 2015 again. So, I mean, he got 2 7-year sentences, and there was other sentences involved in between. He spent a lot of time in prison. So, he's managed to get into a lot of trouble despite being in prison all those years. I mean, he's racked up a lot. And as was said, like, it didn't really reflect his involvement in crime, those convictions that he has. No.
The local profilers that are trained up by the Criminal Assets Bureau are excellent at identifying sometimes the likes of O'Donovan, who appears to have been easy pickings for the state to have taken that home, probably valued at over 200,000 into the state coffers. That's a nice little payday for the state. But those profilers are trained up all over the country, and they're trained to identify, local dealers, criminals, and identify their assets.
And even, and so sometimes the guys make it simple. For instance, when O'Donovan was arrested in Mallow after being stopped, he had his mother's bank card on him, and his excuse was that he'd lost his, so his mother gave him hers. So they had a bank account to go on, and they were looking at, the patterns and what went in. And, in some cases, 1 or 2 of these bank accounts, money went in and never moved. So they weren't being used as somebody living out of, they were kind of storing the cash there. He's 49, I think, now, or something like that.
Sure, my mother would give me her bank card if I lost mine. But
well, it depends how much money you give your mother. If you buy a house in her name, she might.
Yes, indeed. So anyway, what else had the cab to say about him? And was there suggestion that he had an organised gang around him, or is he a sole trader as such?
Coming across, like, he seems to... he seemed to be one of these kind of chaotic individuals when you look at the court cases involved in the murder and then manslaughter trials that he went through. This is a guy out drinking and got into an argument because, a neighbour, an old friend of his, wouldn't let him in to join a party that was going on in the early hours of the morning. So you're kind of wondering just how kind of serious a criminal he is. But to some extent, I suppose he matured along the way. Whether it was for reasons of his own addiction purposes or whether, he was getting smarter at it. But, he was the main supplier of heroin in 2020 in Cork. I mean, he was regularly observed, as they put it, in the company of many serious criminals and known drug dealers over the years. And that was something, that was put to Judge Owens, like in the cab case, that, he wasn't a small-time, he wasn't a small-time dealer. He wasn't, he wasn't somebody dealing with, just, selling enough drugs just to he
wasn't selling on a street corner.
He was doing it for profit. He was doing it for money, which kind of, puts them at a different level. And the fact that he did have, his assets and, they seem to have access to decent cars and so on, none of which are in his name. But
so he was basically had his contacts who were serious criminals, largely in Dublin, in the major sort of heroin operations. And he was bringing down, they believed, drugs and probably wholesaling it onwards then within his local area.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, that would be the pattern. And I suppose that the nature of these things, I mean, and you see it in other cases that you'll have people at that sort of level, they will be the main dealer in a large area for a while. And because of the nature of opiate addiction, people will come to the dealer and buy their stuff or whatever. And it becomes very obvious very quick who the dealer is in the area. And they tend not to last. And they certainly, they'll be picked up, not handily, but, the people at that point, even if they are the wholesaler, if they're the significant wholesaler in an area, the chances are they're going to get caught at some point. So there is a bit of mix and match and change in that regard. And I guess, this is where he is now. Like he's serving his time now for that last arrest.
And of course, around that time, 2020 and shortly before it, I think the prolific wholesaling of the family had put them under the eye of the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. And they were certainly under surveillance and remain under quite heavy surveillance, their activities, which in turn then allows officers see who they are supplying to. So the likes of O'Donovan is probably caught up in that net.
Yeah, I mean, we've all done that a little bit ourselves when you sit out and do a little stakeout trying to get a photograph of somebody, and then you realise, oh, hang on, somebody else completely different that you weren't even thinking about is going into the same place, and it kind of changes the entire nature of the story. And I'm sure if you consider that the guards do this on an industrial scale compared to our hobbyist cottage version of it, like, you can imagine like how much useful information they get if they're running, a big surveillance operation on a serious drug gang who think, who think that they're trying to hide their activities by using people, 3 degrees of separation away. But I mean, so many people in Ireland, tend to be related to other people. And it's like everybody is somebody's next door neighbor, and in Ireland, you get to that next door neighbor a lot quicker than you would in, I don't know, London or New York or somewhere like that. So, I mean, it's not a great country for hiding your activities in that regard. So, I mean, a concerted surveillance operation on any gang is going to yield a lot of results very quickly.
Absolutely. And what about Cork? Are you seeing many cases coming up before the courts?
No, really, no. I mean, like these days, we've had some of our old regulars like still floating around based, in the north inner city and Dublin. But otherwise, like you were starting to see the fruits of kind of the concerted effort to tackle the Limerick money laundering. And that's it's kind of really shown like, how wholesale, how business-like they had become, that they had gotten over the whole feuding and we're getting onto it. I mean, there was a couple of cases this week. Warren and Vicky O'Hare, they were sentenced in the special criminal court this week for €59,000 of unexplained wealth that had gone into their home. They were found guilty and there was a sentence hearing this week and they haven't actually been sentenced yet. That's put further back. Warren was very much putting up his hands there. He was described as being part of the Keane gang.
Yeah.
Christy Keane, that faction, who would have been the Keane Colopy at one point, they're very much separated now. The Keanes aren't so much based in the island field now, and this has all come out that they're very much, Garryowen based. So, you've had Dermot Plum McManus, who is a guy that, we wouldn't necessarily have heard of before, but like he's another trusted, lieutenant of Christy Keane. So these guys are kind of, even though they mightn't be getting, long sentences or any as yet, but, they're being dragged into the light, and it does affect their ability to operate. I mean, okay, 60,000, euro, like in the case of the Hares, it doesn't sound like a whole lot. Sounds
like a lot to me.
Well, but it's a kilo of cocaine, in retail terms, and it's 3 kilos in wholesale terms for these guys. So it's not a whole lot in terms of what the gangs are doing. I mean, we saw it with the Bone Motors case, where it was on a much bigger scale. Like the profits went from 5 million to 8 million within a year. So that's 13 million going through this basically bogus company that was set up specifically to launder all the money. And you had people from both sides of the so-called feuding divide, going through this board of governors that were running it, and the likes of Plum McManus and Christy Keane at meetings with John O'Donoghue in Rathkeale to discuss all this. And Shane Curtin, it really gives you an insight into how they've been working. And we've always suspected that. I mean, you and I always know that there has to be any amount of these guys who are running their own kind of businesses, who are quite competent, and they're able to stay out of range of the guards because they're not, fighting on the street. They don't have chaotic personal lives. They look normal. They drop the kids to school. They might disappear off the scene for a couple of weeks at a time and always seem to have a lot of cash. But there's nothing else to suggest that they're doing anything dodgy. They buy cars at auction in the UK, or they run a small.
They take 5 holidays a year or something. And spend 20 grand on a kid's 21st or whatever. Yeah.
But otherwise they're not seen as being particularly dangerous. They're not doing the crazy stuff that we would have associated with, say, the Dundon brothers. When they were ruling the roost in Limerick City. They weren't. These guys don't go around the place, with an AK-47 in their hands, like bare-chested, telling people they're the king of the hill. I mean, they're far more in the background and know how to work things, and are probably involved in other, more interesting crime from their point of view, like fraud, like buying property and then hiring them out to vice gangs who are trafficking women, and it's all business, and and it's just, and if you have money, you can make money, and if you're one of these people who decides to cross the line and go into that, you'll make a lot of money, and you can stay out of trouble, like if you're smart and if you're at it for long enough. But
and the spend, like, though, I mean, is like, it takes a lot of money to be able to spend 20 grand on a kid's christening or whatever, to go on those fancy holidays 2-3 times a year, to have all those other trappings, the Rolexes and all the rest of it. I mean, they're pulling in tax-free hundreds of thousands of euro a year, and they're spending it.
But again, we've seen that in, if you're going to go to Florida with your kids and, your couple of aunts and cousins, and you're going to spend whatever, 100 grand for, 3 weeks or a month.
It would be that.
And it would be. And they do that. I mean, there was a guy years ago, one of the guys linked with the Radican gang was talking away for some reason. And I said, what do you do with all the money? And he says, well, if there's a shooting or something, we have to bring all the family over to Lanzarote or somewhere. And that costs 18 grand a week. He says, they don't stop drinking, and you're kind of funding them because you have to mind them. You might have 20 cars, but, and they're parked all over the place. And so the money, these are guys that I suppose they were very busy, but they were at lower end.
The money goes through their hands like water, though. It's like they don't seem to have a long-term plan for it. They can't obviously put the money into pension pots. They can't put it into the things that normal people do.
But even if you're spending 100 grand on a holiday in Florida, and even if you fly business class, you still have to use a credit card somewhere along the line. And what they've been doing is using kind of a third party, giving them the money and getting them to buy the tickets. And we're seeing those people now turning up in court cases saying, well, you didn't actually go on this holiday, but Ross Browning, went here and went there, and the flights booked for this person and that person, including, and this all came out, in Ross Browning's case. Yeah. There was a relation of his then who was, her credit card was generally used to, and even flew people in for the David Byrne's funeral, like on behalf of the Kinahans. So, I mean, you can't really hide cash. All you can do is give cash to people.
There's always a trace there.
But then, if you have a car, all of a sudden, instead of the cash, you still have to explain where the car came from under the Proceeds of Crime Act. So it's getting increasingly difficult.
And there seems to be an increasing focus on money laundering and on going for that. Is it easy, to prove going through the courts, or is it an effort by the state to try and teach people that, you can't help out these criminals, or you're committing a crime yourself?
It's I think all of that. And it's not that it's gotten easier, but I think there obviously more and more officers have been through CAB and have seen how it works. And I'd say the knowledge of that has spread to some extent. And that if you want to take on a gang in a particular area, start taking the money off them, take the cars, take the properties, if you can, if it's obvious, and even if it's not obvious, put in the work. People know how to do it now. I mean, the forensic work, the accountancy work that goes into it is difficult and painstaking, but it's not impossible. And really, from the other point of view, it's almost impossible to hide it. I mean, you can hide it from a cursory glance. If somebody, you're able to produce, to somebody, oh, here's the receipt for this and here's the receipt for that. But they'll say, great, who gave you that receipt? They'll go back then to where that receipt came from. And then they'll go back to where the money for that receipt came from. And then they go back to where that money was withdrawn from. And, and they'll find... They'll
follow the money.
I'm sure they don't find it all, but they'll find enough of it to make it stick. And, and it's about denying these gangs I suppose the chance to enjoy the fruits of their success. So that, okay, they might sell a certain amount of drugs, they have a certain amount of overheads, they got to pay people. But where are they going to go with all this cash? In some cases, they literally have to stick it in a suitcase and drive somewhere else.
It's chipping away though as well at the structures of the gangs, taking the money, taking the assets and all the rest of it. And even going after them on, for smaller crimes committed. Okay, a year sentence doesn't sound like very much, but he will be off the streets for a particular amount of time that will damage his business. Yeah,
or someone will take over his business and push him further down the line. And, that the next person taking up might be better, they might be less efficient, but at least they'll have it in the back of their head, well, I'm not going to get caught, or, the way he did, or they'll think they'll have done something better. But it's hard to, it definitely disrupts them. I mean, it has to.
It does. I mean, even going back to when a lot of the policing was focused on these terrorist cells, even when they got a kind of a guilty plea for, membership of an organisation, somebody might get 4 years. Once they got enough of them and put them away for even 3 years, it seemed to break up those cells, and then it would take them a long time to restructure themselves when they did get out.
Yeah,
there was fallings out, obviously, then a paranoia goes into it, and who's ratting on who, and all that sort of damages.
Yeah, I mean, even as to use a sporting analogy, if your star player gets injured, or or if your solid centre back and goalie all of a sudden can't turn up anymore, and you're starting to leak goals, to the opposition, and that's what it is what it's about. It's about chipping away. And I mean, I suppose you've even heard it, after the events last Thursday night, for people want immediate results and they want to see immediate justice, but it doesn't work that way in a democracy. I mean, and policing is a 24-hour job. They need to work away at these gangs constantly, and I suppose in over the years, we've seen the issue where focus has drifted off for whatever reason. And then, it suddenly comes back, and, there's major operations launched against big drug gangs because they've just gotten too big, and suddenly they've crossed the line, or, their political will suddenly comes into it, and they're being, people are being pushed to do it, or suddenly given the resources that they'd been denied to do previously. So, I mean, it's a constant battle in that sense. And the idea that we're going to see a swift overnight end of it all, and, complete rout and victory of the forces of law and order and polite society, that's never going to happen. Because too many members of polite society like their little bit of cocaine at the weekends, and too many people are sadly addicted to opiates and sometimes resort to, heroin. I mean, it's probably not a problem for the middle classes because they can go to a consultant and with, dodgy neck pains or whatever and get their OxyContin.
Some of them can afford it, you know. And you can continue in heroin addiction until old age if you can afford it, and it doesn't affect your health.
If you're getting the good stuff, the pure stuff.
But interesting to hear a story from Cork, and a kind of a mid-level guy, John Keith O'Donovan, and interesting to hear that he's had this run of bad luck.
Yeah, and it's always good, I think, in these communities that guys who are probably well known as the local Mr. Criminal, the Mr. Underworld, and to see them kind of lose out and, get whatever they have taken off him is great. People will see he's not a role model, and what's in it in the long run.
The cab always gives us good news, doesn't it?
But hasn't disappointed this year anyway.
Not indeed. Eamon Dillon, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.